Today, we will examine two of the most dangerous stories in history. First, a team stranded helplessly at a height of 37 meters was attacked by 1,200 African honeybees and hung there in agony for hours. Second, a diver refused to abandon his friend after the friend suffered a seizure several meters underwater, even though his own air supply was running out. We don't yet know if they survived, but one thing is certain: no one would want to be in their shoes. Welcome to Cave Tragedies. Can you withstand 1,200 bee stings? Isn't that medically impossible? What if you can't escape? Every second you move means hundreds of new stings. At 37 meters high, suspended by a rope, with your only option being to wait for death, you're probably in a safe place right now. At home, in your bed, maybe under your blanket. Watching this video will give you the creeps, but in the end, you'll turn off the screen and go back to your safe life. Whether they will return is a big mystery. June 9th, 2007. In the arid lands of Mexico, a massive sinkhole known as Pozo de Gavilon, 90 meters deep and 60 meters in diameter. Its walls are covered in steep limestone, its bottom filled with dark waters, and beneath those waters lie cave passages waiting to be discovered. Helios Medina and 9 friends had arrived that morning, filled with excitement for their new exploration trip. The group had 2 separate objectives. Medina and 4 of his friends were certified cave divers. They would explore the underwater passages beneath the pool. The other 5 would practice rope techniques in preparation for Mexico's 2 deepest sinkholes, Sótano de las Golondrinas and Olla de las Guaguas. None of them could even imagine how they would get out of that hole. The group began preparations for the descent, but encountered an unexpected problem. There were no trees or rocks at the edge of the sinkhole to attach the ropes to. The group, divided by differing opinions, considered postponing or even canceling the plan, because the lack of a place to attach the rope would make the descent impossible and the adventure would end before it even began. The team members, who had no intention of giving up, finally decided to securely attach the rope to the tow hook of their SUV with 2 ropes. What they didn't know was that this decision would almost cost one person their life. At 10 a.m., Medina was the first to descend. The diving equipment hung below his waist and weighed him down. Due to this weight, Medina's descent began to accelerate uncontrollably. Medina managed to slow his descent by wrapping his legs around the rope to increase friction, but the force of the friction caused the synthetic rope to inflict severe pain on his leg. The rest of the team managed to descend one by one. Around 2 p.m., 5 divers prepared their diving equipment and began swimming to explore the deep waters. As they descended deeper, daylight gave way to darkness and a sharp cold. At 120 feet, they reached underwater cave passages, but they didn't know what awaited them, and they didn't have enough energy or courage today to enter the unexplored passages. They returned to the surface. The diving team gathered their equipment and clothing, preparing for the climb. The reason they didn't want to exhaust themselves underwater was that the climb would be much more tiring than the descent and dive. The steep limestone walls rising 285 feet were quite a grueling process, even for professional climbers. Medina, one of the most experienced members of the group, decided to climb last in order to safely bring the less experienced climbers up and check the equipment before the climb. Meanwhile, another experienced member of the group climbed first so that he could assist the less experienced climbers at critical points during the climb. By 3 p.m., 2 people had reached the summit. 4 people, 1 man and 3 women, continued to advance calmly on the ropes, the clatter of climbing equipment echoing throughout the cave. Medina had not yet started climbing and was immersed in the beauty of the view below. She was startled by a sudden horrified scream from above. When she looked up, her heart leapt out of her chest in horror at what she saw. One of the climbers had been using a limestone wall for support, but it had cracked, and a hive full of African honeybees had burst out of the crack, swarming the 4 people hanging on the rope. There were far more bees than in a normal hive. The 4 people hanging from the ropes were writhing in pain and screaming for help as they were stung hundreds of times, the pain becoming unbearable. Those waiting at the summit heard the screams and rushed to the bottom of the pit to see what was happening, but the bees saw them as a threat and began attacking them too. Seconds felt like hours, and the bee invasion became unbearable for the victims. Those at the top were far enough away to escape the bees, but those hanging from the rope were only a short distance from the hive, and the bees attacked in swarms, stinging every exposed area they found. Faced with this scene, Medina, horrified, realized she was panicking, took deep breaths to calm herself, and quickly began searching for a solution. Meanwhile, the group above lowered the third rope from the pit, and an experienced member of the group descended to rescue those hanging on the rope. Each descent meant being stung repeatedly, and each sting caused indescribable pain. He sped up and approached the nearest woman, attached her climbing harness to his own belt, took a knife in his hand, and cut the other rope binding the woman in agony. He pulled the woman up to the summit with double the load. He didn't wait. He descended again and pulled the second climber up in the same way. When he reached the top, he was covered in blisters and unbearable pain. His breathing was labored, his muscles were cramping, and his adrenaline was rapidly dropping. He managed to stagger to the car and called emergency services for help. Medina, who was 285 feet below, wasted no time putting on his diving suit. This suit would seriously protect him from bee attacks, but his hands and head were exposed, so those parts would not be protected. Meanwhile, one of the climbers hanging on the rope, about 80 feet above the ground, was still trying to scream in pain, while the other, 40 feet above him, was moving back and forth on the rope in pain from the attacks. As he moved, the bees saw this movement as a threat and became even more aggressive. As Medina began climbing upward, the adrenaline rush prevented him from reacting to the individual bee attacks. But as he ascended, the number and intensity of the attacks increased, subjecting his body to unbearable pain. Upon reaching the first climber, Medina, in agony, tied the climber's harness to his own, freeing him from the rope he was attached to, and attempted a controlled descent, which was far from easy. When they descended, the climber's entire body was covered in severe swelling, and toxins had accumulated in his body due to the constant stings. His entire body was convulsing, and he was on the verge of losing consciousness. Meanwhile, a member of the group above, in a panic, began reversing the vehicle to rescue the climber, doing something he shouldn't have done, and the ropes rubbing against the hard rocks on the descent section of the pit suffered serious wear. The danger for the suspended climber had doubled. Realizing the situation, Medina, knowing the climb would be risky, was forced to endure the horror of the scene before her, and she just stood there watching. The team next to Medina began to attend to the injured person next to them, whose condition was deteriorating and who was beginning to have constant seizures. He was no longer responding to anything. By 4:15 p.m., the rescue teams had arrived. A large team of 50 people surrounded the crater, but the bees saw them as a threat and began to attack. After hours of rescue efforts, the teams brought the stranded climber to the surface approximately 6 hours later. The patients were quickly taken to the hospital by ambulance, immediately underwent surgery, and were then placed in intensive care. The first climber rescued had been stung approximately 600 times and remained in intensive care for 3 days. The second climber rescued, who triggered the beehive, had been stung approximately 900 times and remained in intensive care for 2 weeks. The climber rescued by Medina and brought down to the ground was stung 400 times. Due to the severity of the stings and the effect of the venom, he lost consciousness and went into shock. Despite this, he remained in intensive care for 3 days and was then transferred to a regular room. The climber who was left hanging on the rope and exposed to the bee attack for hours remained in intensive care for 1 week, then was transferred to a normal room. But due to multiple stings, his organs could not withstand the venom and he was readmitted to intensive care. He had been stung approximately 1,200 times. All of the climbers left the hospital alive, and after this terrifying incident, they continued climbing to deeper and higher places, let alone passing by sinkholes. What do you think about these climbers? Imagine entering a room filled with flies on a hot summer day, and these flies, which cause nothing but disgust, begin to circle around your head, crawl into your clothes, and give you an unbearable feeling of suffocation. Now imagine if these were bees instead. Isn't that terrifying? You can share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if your friend started having a panic attack underwater and there were only 150 meters left to the exit? You can imagine divers feeling relieved and safer as they approach the surface. The danger of the deep, dark waters has been overcome, and as they ascend, the darkness fades away with the peace of seeing daylight. The water clears. Sunlight awaits you above. Cave divers call this moment seeing the light. The moment you feel the danger is over. The moment you relax. Pete Reagan saw that light. He was only 150 meters away, but those 150 meters are when some divers take their last breath. This story is about a man who lost everything just a few hundred meters from daylight, and a friend who fought to the last breath as the cave swallowed him. On February 16, 2002, experienced cave divers entered Little River Spring, one of North Florida's most beautiful and deceptive systems. Little River appears innocent, even serene from the surface. Crystal clear water, a gentle current, an inviting entrance. But once you step inside, the rules change. Tons of rock above you, side passages ready to surprise you ahead, a current pushing you back behind you. Among the group that day were 55-year-old Pete Reagan and 43-year-old Frank Murphy. The two knew each other, trusted each other. The dive followed a normal, safe plan. In the dome room, the group made a standard decision. They would end the dive and head for the exit. Everyone was relaxed. There was no risk. On the way out, Murphy and Reagan continued straight toward the entrance. Murphy in front, Reagan behind. A simple formation, common, safe. They were swimming against the current, moving toward daylight. No silt, no problems. No worries. Then Murphy felt a gnawing silence. He turned around. Reagan wasn't there. In that moment, he felt his heart stop. Reagan was motionless, drifting toward the bottom of the water, 12 meters behind Murphy. His body was convulsing, his muscles spasming violently. Reagan had suffered a serious neurological problem. 150 meters from the exit, his arms, legs, his entire body was spasming as if out of control, and Reagan was not responding. Murphy was facing one of the worst scenarios a diver could encounter. His heart was racing, his hands were starting to shake, and panic was taking over his entire body, causing him to lose control. However, he quickly realized he had to overcome the shock of what he had just experienced and help his friend. He swam back quickly, caught his friend, and placed the air regulator in his mouth. Performing this maneuver on someone having a seizure is quite difficult. The person's jaw muscles, along with all their other muscles, contract violently and can become impossible to move. Seeing that Reagan was still not breathing, Murphy used the purge valve to release the air from the oxygen tank, delivering oxygen directly to Reagan's lungs. At first, it seemed to work, and Reagan began to breathe, but after a short time, he stopped breathing again. Murphy continued to repeat this difficult and physically exhausting task over and over again, but to no avail. Murphy found himself in a situation that probably none of us would ever want to be in. His friend had gone into convulsions at a distance quite close to the surface, and his breathing kept stopping. Moreover, Murphy was now feeling physically and mentally exhausted. He had two options before him. The first was to leave Reagan and go up to the surface, then call for help to get Reagan out. However, Reagan would likely be dead by then, and Murphy did not want to leave him to die. The second option was to bring Reagan to the surface, which was not easy at all. He would have to swim against a strong current with twice the load. For Murphy, who was already exhausted, the chances of reek. What would you do? Would you turn back and risk your life to drag your friend along? Or would you surface and call for help? So what do you think Murphy did? Let's continue. Murphy, struggling to make a decision due to his physical and psychological state, didn't want to waste time thinking. With a sudden reflex, he grabbed Reagan by the arms and began swimming against the current. Reagan's breathing kept stopping, forcing Murphy to stop constantly and pump air into Reagan's lungs. While Reagan's lungs struggled to take in the air he was giving him, Murphy was fighting the current with the weight of his own size. During this time, Murphy's air tank was almost empty. They were close, painfully close. Only 100 meters remained to the surface. As Murphy pulled Reagan, his own breathing quickened, and he struggled to breathe. He was physically exhausted, cramps constantly shooting through his legs and arms, and his ascent slowed with every passing second. They were 12 meters from the surface, just 12 meters. Murphy's air tank was completely empty. Murphy could no longer breathe, and his mind was starting to cloud over. In a semi-conscious state, he reached for Reagan's air tank and took a deep breath. However, his oxygen was also running out, and he had to share it with Reagan. There were 3 meters left to the surface. Murphy continued, switching the air tank between himself and Reagan, but this breath was insufficient for his adrenaline-filled body. The divers above the water noticed something was wrong. Without wasting any time, they dove into the water, took Reagan from Murphy's hand, and brought them both to the surface. Murphy took a deep breath. Every breath he took seemed insufficient for his lungs. The salt water burned his throat, each breath intensifying the burning sensation. The divers rushed Reagan to the hospital immediately. However, Pete Reagan did not survive. Murphy, after resting in the hospital for a while, continued his life in good health, constantly feeling Reagan's pain deep within him. There is no mistake to examine here, no wrong turn, no bad decision, just a reminder of a truth known to cave divers but never accepted. You can do everything right and still lose. Medical incidents don't care about experience. They don't care how close you are to the exit. Caves don't forgive. Pete Reagan died in a place where thousands of divers have safely entered and exited. He died with a skilled friend right beside him. He died almost touching the daylight. That's what makes this story so unforgettable. If it can happen there, in clear water, so close to the light, with help so close, it can happen anywhere. Hitting the surface with the second option were quite low.